Morning guys. Well, it's a beautiful day and I have an amazing saw to show all of you. So this is, let's stump a bit closer. This is one of my gorgeous Time Warp Pioneer 650 saws. So where to start with these monsters? Canadian manufacture and a massive 103cc displacement. I think they run I'm pretty sure, I think the metric equivalent, I think it's a 57 or 56 or 57 mil piston with a 40 mil stroke, an absolute thumper of an engine. And she's running a full Oregon setup, so full chisel 404 chain, Oregon solid nose bar with fabulous symmetry. It was a recent batch of Oregon bars I managed to buy, which were in excellent condition, virtually no use, and so can run up to a nominal 30-inch bar of that ilk. And I wanted to do a video for this saw because several questions I've had about some of the older saws. So this one is mid-60s to mid-70s, last of the breed. When they stopped the 650, that was the last of this particular lineup of saws, and shares a few components with some other well-known saws and has a lot of unique components just for the Pioneer as well. And so, idiosyncratic, absolutely. And what do I mean by that? So whether something has some idiosyncrasies, you could misinterpret those as faults or failings when really they're traits which something has which are completely peculiar or unique to that person or that item. And in this instance, this saw, a little bit like some of the Clintons and some of the early Danoms, they are by their very nature idiosyncratic. That means they have certain traits which only apply to this engine or to that particular model, and even if you get similar traits across all of those engines, they're still, every one's still individual. And so these series of carburetors that run on the Pioneers are the early HL Tillotsons. So their predecessors, the HC and the HJ, without the pump valves or pump assembly but still have the diaphragm externally pumped. These run an early version of the HL, so they have the internal pump. But what people may not realise is that on the early HL carburetors, every governor valve, if the carburetor is fitted with one, was factory set for each individual engine. And so you could take another carburetor off another engine, same engine in terms of the model, refit it onto the same engine but a different engine, try to run it and have different engine characteristics completely because the governors are set differently. And also, interestingly, the high and low needles were individually seated inside some of those carburetors, as well as the main jet, can you believe? So if people buying a cheap replacement carburetor jet kit would try to refit and put a new main needle in, they would often find that it would be overfueling, not switching off, recycling back into the engine, because they're just not matched with the seat. And so idiosyncratic, not a fault but just peculiar for that particular model, and the list goes on as well. And so when you run these saws, or if anybody buys these saws, you have to remember that they won't be like picking up a brand new saw and then having the consistent day in, day out running which so many people enjoy with a modern saw. But what they do offer is something which you just don't get with a modern saw, which is the provenance and the history of the company and the early full magnesium alloy build construction, and just using a piece of history that still works so fantastic and is so tolerant in so many different environments. And which is why you know, you can run these one day and they'll be fantastic. The next day you'll try to run it and the tick over will be off. It won't seem to start. Then you will have flooded it and you think, okay, what the hell's happening with this saw? So, which is why, of course, as well, they have a very handy little brass high needle lever, because when they made them, they knew that they would, on some days they'd be peaking correctly with one fuel mix, then the next day you'd be adjusting it when you're cutting in the forest. And I got an ever so interesting internal document from Clinton Chainsaws, and it actually states in the document that when those saws were first out, they would barely idle, if idle at all. So you had a saw, and so if you then ran one 50 years later and you think, this saw doesn't idle properly, well, they never idled properly. So as long as people remember that when you buy them, you're going to love this type of engine, because it's something which you're going to look after and use, and they're just spectacular. So for all their peculiarities, they are absolute works of art, in every one completely individual in their own right. And so that's why finding an original one, all original components, original felling spike, original carb with all the overspray, is so spectacular a find, because it's, when they get changed in touch, then they start to no longer work properly unless you have somebody that really understands the nature of this type of beast. Guys, I have a phone call. I'm going to pause the video, as I haven't shown her cutting yet. I'm going to show her cutting through some 22-inch wood, if she's agreeable and not too temperamental today. And I'd love to hear any feedback. I've got to pause it and take this call. Back in a moment, guys. Hi again, guys. Okay. Doing another thing I find is quite amusing, really, when you do see old saws for sale and people say the only thing wrong with it just needs a simple carb tune. And you think, okay. So I think the genuine HL Tillotson service kit, the last ones I had from America, are around £35, and people just don't spend that on carburetor kits normally. They like to buy, you know, the Chinese kits, and I know firsthand from many attempts that for the majority of the time they don't do anything except introduce another problem to that engine, and then you're chasing your tail, and that's a terrible thing to be doing with a vintage engine, because, you know, if they're not running right, they already present enough challenges, and on starting some of these, no throttle lock. So typically they have a slightly faster idle as well, and that's, you know, that's really necessary too. Okay guys, let's see how the beast performs today. Check memory, I don't have an awful lot of... No, we're good. Okay, here we go. Kill switch. tell me if that is not anything other than magnificent.